Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to discuss with you how to set up a blockchain as well as how to secure it. I hope all of you have received the link for this presentation. The reason that I want you to download the presentation is because while we are discussing, there are going to be some links that you are going to click, which may not be possible if you're only looking at it on the screen. So the URL is with you. If you've downloaded it, great. What we're going to do is I'm going to begin with the tech terms around blockchain, then how to install a blockchain, some basic blockchain commands, and then we are going to discuss how to secure them as well as the security controls. Now, when we talk about blockchain security, there are actually 5 different elements that we need to consider. So one is that there is a concept called immutability of data, which means you can prove in a court of law that the data has not been tampered. That is available to us because of the blockchain technology. But blockchain by itself doesn't really do all this, and that is the reason we use hash functions to ensure the integrity of the data. Then for confidentiality of the data, we use symmetric and asymmetric crypto. For ensuring the availability of data, we obviously set up a blockchain with multiple nodes so that even if some of the nodes are down, the others can continue to serve the data. And finally, for non-repudiation, we use digital signatures so that nobody can deny having signed a transaction or signed some data. Now, I'd be really happy if you keep this as an interactive session. So the moment you have a doubt, you can just type it into the chat and I'll immediately resolve it. So far, is it clear that because we are using these multiple technologies, let's first try to understand these technologies and what they really mean. Now, the first step is a hash function. Many of you may be aware of it, but let me just give you a quick overview. So a hash function is a mathematical algorithm which is going to give you a fixed length output. So let's say there is a particular hash algorithm called SHA-1. No matter what input you give it, it will always give you a 40-character output. Similarly, SHA-2, 3, and the size of the output increases. But what is very important to remember is for a given input, the output will always be the same. So for example, here, when I use the word Sanya in all small letters, it is going to give you this result, irrespective of whether you're running this hash function on, let's say, a Windows machine, Mac machine. None of it makes any difference. It is ultimately a mathematical formula. So for the small letter Sanya, it will always give you this. For the capital letter Sanya, it will give you this. And if you pick the first one capital, everything else small, it gives you something else. Which basically means that if you change the input even by a single dot in, let's say, a 50,000 page document, the hash output will immediately change. And these are called one-way hash functions. So you can always take an input, feed it into the hash and get the output, but not the reverse. Just by looking at this output, you are not going to be able to find out what the input was. And this could be done not just for words, but you could take PDFs, Word documents, any kind of an input can actually be used. And in fact, in the blockchain world, transactions which we do, they ultimately also get hashed like this. Any questions so far? Okay. Now, the second point is, now if let's have a look at some of these hash functions or hash values. So if you just simply click on this, I think I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Yeah, I hope my screen is visible now. So here, I'm going to just enter any particular word. You can also try this later on your own. And now as you can see that the hashes for this word hello are obviously going to be different in every hash algorithm that we use. So if we use MD2, which is only 32 characters, this is what it will be. MD4, MD5, and all these are available. Usually in today's day and age, we use the SHA 512 or these are the commonly used options, but there are so many hash algorithms which can be used. By and large, the blockchains that we are going to talk about are going to be using the SHA family of hash functions. I hope that's clear so far. Let me just, yeah. Okay. Can you please tell me how we hack in blockchain system? Okay, it's a little too early to answer this question. There are actually multiple points through which you are going to be able to hack a blockchain. So I'm going to come back to that question a little later. Any other questions as of right now? Okay. Now we come to one of the most important concepts, which is what we call as the proof of work. In fact, this is the innovation that was done to make Bitcoin a reality. Now, proof of work was invented somewhere in the early 1990s, actually as a way of controlling spam email. But because Bitcoin's blockchain runs on proof of work, in fact, even Ethereum runs on that, it is very important for us to understand exactly how proof of work works. Now, to give you a simple example, I have created an input here. So let us say that we are sending an email to somebody. Now, in that email, we are now also going to send some code. Now, let's see how we are going to derive that code. So this first thing that you see, rn@asianlaws.org, is the sender's email address, separated by this small symbol here. Then we have the receiver's email address, which is rohas@primechain.in. After that, we have another symbol here, and then we have the date. So let's say this email was being sent on 11th of January 2021. Now, at the end of this, we have to generate this number, which you can see in red. That is what we call as a nonce, N-O-N-C-E. Now, how are we going to generate it? So the sender, his computer system, is going to create this input and in the beginning write 0. Then run it through the hash function and get a result like this. But the rule here is that the hash must begin with 4 zeros. So the sender will keep calculating hashes till he hits upon a number where, for example, in this case, it is 44482. When that is used as a nonce and this entire line is hashed, the result begins with 4 zeros. So why do we call this as a proof of work? Because we recognize that we are going to work at calculating the nonce. So the sender's computer is doing some work, and that work is calculating hashes. And only when he finds a nonce where the hashes are beginning with 4 zeros, then he can send the email along with the nonce 44482. When the receiver's computer gets it, the email, they will again run it through the hash by using only one number, which is the 44482. If the resultant hash begins with those 4 zeros, they will accept it and say, yes, this email seems to have come from a genuine person. So as you can understand, the basic thing we are solving is that when a spammer sends out millions of emails, he is not doing any work, so he can send out a huge number of emails. But now if we force him to use proof of work, his rate of sending emails is going to slow down, because for every email he is going to calculate a nonce, and that takes some time to do. But the verification of the nonce is instantaneous, and that is the basic logic behind proof of work. Can you let me know if you have any questions on this? Is proof of work absolutely clear? It'd be great if you can just say even yes, it's clear, so that I know and I can immediately move on to the next one. I hope I'm audible and everyone's understood here. The reason I need to keep asking is because this is a digital session. I can't see faces yet. So is everything audible? Perfect. Great. Now let's move ahead. I have given you 2 links here. Later you can run them on your machine. And what I've done is I've actually given you a demo of how to run nonces and how a nonce solves the puzzle. If we have time, I will come back to this in the end. Otherwise, you can later try it on your own. Now, the next concept that we need to understand is called a Merkle tree. Now, let's say that we have 4 pieces of data. Now, this data can be a Word document, PDF document, a movie, or even a financial transaction. So we call it data 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, each data can be hashed. We discussed hash functions. So we say data 1, this is the hash. Data 2, this is the hash. 3 and 4. Then what we do is we take the hashes of 1 and 2 and combine these 2 hashes or concatenate them to each other and rehash it, and then we get this. Similarly for 3 and 4, we get this. Then we take these 2, concatenate, again run a hash. We continue to do this process till we are finally left with one single hash, which is this example here. That last final hash that we find is known as the Merkle root, and this entire chain of hashes that you saw is called the Merkle tree. So because of this Merkle root concept, even though we have like 10, 15,000 data points or transactions, ultimately we can calculate just one hash which represents all of them. And if you tweak or change even one of those hashes, or sorry, one of those data points, the final hash will not match. So if there are 10,000 transactions, I don't need to keep 10,000 hashes. I keep only one hash, and that one hash can tell me whether all those 10,000 transactions are correct or somebody has tampered with them. That concept is called a Merkle tree. Is that clear? Any questions? Again, somebody's going to have to say yes, no, or ask a question. Okay, great. Now let's move to the blockchain. What does a blockchain actually look like? Now this is very, very important for us to understand. Now every blockchain begins with block number 0, which is also called as the Genesis block. Now for sake of an example, let us first begin with block number 16. It is just a random thing. So let's say we are now, the blockchain has started working and we have reached block 16, 17, 18. Now let's take 17 as our core focus for right now. Now what you see here on top is called the header of the blockchain. Primarily it contains 4 things. Previous hash, that means hash of the previous block. Timestamp, which is the time of this particular block. Transaction root, which represents the Merkle root of all the transactions in this particular block. And finally the nonce. That same example that we saw earlier in an email, imagine the same thing which is happening here in the block. So whatever block 16 header is, this data concatenated and hash becomes this. So that every block knows what is the hash of the previous block. So that if someone tampers with this guy can immediately identify something has gone wrong. Timestamp, of course, when this particular block gets hashed. Transaction root, Merkle root of all the transactions here. And nonce is that proof of work thing that we are going to calculate. Now, many of you may have heard that when we talk about Bitcoin, miners are solving a mathematical problem. Now, many times people don't understand what that means. This is the mathematical problem. They are trying to calculate a nonce. So basically, when you talk about mining machines, those are machines which are calculating a huge number of hashes every second. I'm going to show you what that looks like. And that is the mathematical puzzle that a miner needs to solve. And the first guy to do it is usually the person who gets paid the reward. So you must have heard in Bitcoin, for mining every block, initially you used to get 50 Bitcoins. Then it became 25, then 12.5, now it's 6.25. So according to the initial Genesis block of Bitcoin, the first 4 years, for every block, 50 new Bitcoins were created. After that, for the next 4 years, 25. Next 4 years, 12.5. Next 4 years, 6.25. Like this, every 4 years, that is becoming half the reward. And finally, in the year 2140 AD, which is more than 120 years to go, at that time, the last Bitcoin will be mined, and then there will be no reward left for mining any new block. Of course, as a miner, you will continue to earn the transaction fee in each block, but no new Bitcoins will be generated after that block, which happens in 2140 AD. Any questions so far? Is it absolutely clear? Now, some of you may also wonder, how long does it take to hash a block? Now, the average block time is 10 minutes. Now, why do I say average block time? Why can't I say for sure that every block will happen in 10 minutes? No, it doesn't work like that. Because nobody can predict how much time it is going to take to hash a block. Because we are running random, see, it's all randomly being done, right? The data is changing, nobody can predict. So what the blockchain software does is it keeps recalculating the difficulty level. So what it will do is every 2 weeks, it will look back at the past and say, what was the average time taken to hash a block? Suppose the answer is it was 12 minutes. Now the software realizes, no, it is only supposed to be 10, but it has taken 12, which means the difficulty level is higher. So it will reduce the difficulty, and then again 2 weeks will go by. Then it will check, it comes to the conclusion, oh, it took only 8 minutes. It will again recalculate. So the blockchain is constantly changing this difficulty level, which means the number of zeros, so that the average time of 10 minutes is maintained. And that is the reason we say average 10 minutes per block. But even today, some blocks will take more time, some blocks will take less time. Questions? Again, simple yes, no, clear, or any questions, please feel free to ask me. Because this is one of the most important concepts. So after all Bitcoins will get mined, there will be just transaction fee left. Absolutely correct. After all those Bitcoins are mined, which is a total of just under 21 million, which will happen. We are expecting it to happen in the year 2140 AD, but it could go aage piche a little bit. Yes, after that, no new bitcoins will be created. And that is why we say that Bitcoin is a non-inflationary currency. Because normal currency notes which you have, government can print as much as it wants, and that is what causes inflation. But in Bitcoin, the numbers are fixed. All these things that I told you about, the 10-minute average block time, then every 2 weeks adjusting, then 2140 AD, everything getting over, all that is actually recorded in the Genesis block, so we can't change it. And that is why we say Bitcoin is a non-inflationary currency. Clear? Any other questions? Okay. So as we can see from this, in the blockchain, we have an ordered and time-stamped record. So every block is block 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's also called the block height. So it has to go in that order. Every block has a timestamp which is there in it, so you know exactly when that block was mined. This concept prevents double spending. Now, you may not understand what is double spending. Now, double spending is a very critical concept. When you take a currency note, can you spend it 2 times? No, because once you give it to somebody, the note is out of your hand. But if I write an email or I make a Word document in which I say, I owe you 100 rupees, and I put my digital signature, you can copy paste that Word document 20 times and now ask me to pay 20 times the money. And that concept is called double spending. But because in blockchains or in Bitcoin, we are using these blocks and we are doing time stamping and ordering, you cannot double spend money. When whatever money you have, so to say, I know money is not the right word to use here, whatever bitcoins you supposedly have, they actually don't exist. It is simply that everybody has an address which is like an alphanumeric number, and that corresponds to some value in terms of number of bitcoins on this platform. But you have a private public key pair, and every transaction you are going to sign with your private key. So it remains totally under your control, but it also means you cannot spend the same thing twice. Yeah, somebody says, please explain more. Sure, I'll definitely do that. But before that, the last point is the blockchain prevents modification of previous records because every block knows the hash of the previous block, so you cannot really modify it. Just to give you a brief overview of what we discussed. So blockchain started block number 0. In this example, we are starting with block number 17. Every block header, this part is the header of the block. This, you could say, is the data of the block or the content. Every block knows the hash of the previous block. Every block, when it's to get mined, so let's take a practical example again in Bitcoin. So let's say many people have made lots of transactions within a 10-minute time span. All those transactions are now pushed into the mempool or the memory pool of the blockchain. Then all the memory pool now is going to be analyzed by different miners, all of whom are running these powerful machines. See, I'm simplifying it down a little bit. I'm not being 100% accurate, but to understand what it means. All the miners pick up these transactions, calculate all these hashes, and then quickly try to calculate the nonce. The first guy who succeeds immediately broadcasts the nonce onto the blockchain, and everybody else can see it. And people say, okay, let me verify. Yes, this is all correct. The nonce matches. Done. This block is now mined. Now let me follow this fellow and start with the next block. 17 is done. I'm starting with 18, and all the miners again now start competing with each other for the next one. Sometimes it happens that the same block or the same time, multiple miners get the nonce, and all of them broadcast that we have cracked it. Now suddenly the blockchain splits into multiple blockchains. Next block happens, and after every few blocks the blockchain checks, and if it realizes there are multiple chains running, it will delete all of them and only leave the longest chain. And this regularly happens, and it is all automated by the software. No one has to manually do any of these. Questions? Is it absolutely clear to everyone? No one has questions? Great, because this is the fastest anyone has ever understood this concept. So great, I'm very impressed. Okay. Now, why do we use this word miner? Now, a lot of people get confused that it is like gold mining. So when a miner digs into the ground and he discovers gold, he is doing mining physically and thereby getting some kind of gold out of it. But when we talk about Bitcoin mining, he is calculating hashes by expending computational power and electricity. So that is why they say that Bitcoin consumes a huge amount of electricity, because so many miners are constantly running these machines which consume huge amount of electricity. In fact, that is one of the reasons why Bitcoin mining is usually done in cold countries, because the computers get heated a lot. So if the country is cold by nature, the cooling costs are much cheaper. And that is the reason you find a lot of these mining activities happening in those places. So next point, if you read, to add an entire block to the blockchain, the Bitcoin miner must successfully hash a block header to a value which is below the target threshold. That is why the number of zeros. Because when you look at a hash, it is actually it is like a hexadecimal number. And that is why the system keeps adjusting the difficulty level. Any question? Is it all clear? Perfect. Now, in Bitcoin or in many of these proof of work blockchains, we have a concept called a hash rate, which is the speed of mining. That means the number of hashes per second. So the number of times that hash values are calculated for proof of work every second is called the hash rate. And this is measured in either small k, which is 1000, which is kilo, mega, which is 1 million, giga, which is 1 billion, or tera, which is 1 trillion hashes. So naturally, the more powerful your computer or your servers for mining, the more likely that you will end up successfully hashing and thereby getting the reward and transaction fee. Is that clear? Any questions? Okay. Now, this is an example of the Antminer T9 Bitcoin cash. So this is for Bitcoin cash mining. That's another crypto which is related to Bitcoin, one of the forks of it. So this is what it looks like. It doesn't need to have all the monitor and all that, because you're not supposed to look at it. It's all automated stuff. So you buy a lot of these kinds of machines. So this is one example. So in China, these are some of the mines. This is what they look like, where you have a large number of uneducated kind of people whose only job is to make sure the computers or the mines are working fine. You know, the power is not getting disconnected, cooling is happening. Another example, this would be a European mine, slightly neater looking. And ultimately, this is what a Bitcoin or a Ethereum mining looks like. It is just a bunch of machines. You don't really need human beings to do anything whatsoever. Is that clear? Questions? Perfect. Now, there's a slight complication when it comes to this transaction fee. When a new Bitcoin block is generated, the information for all the transactions is included in that block. And all the transaction fees are collected by the miner. But it is important to remember that transaction fee is actually voluntary. No compulsion. You can choose how much transaction fee you are ready to pay, and you can bid that. But you know what? Miner doesn't have to accept all your transactions. So suppose you have bid 0. The miner can just choose to ignore your transaction, and it may not just get verified for a very long time. So when you bid the transaction fee, obviously the miner tries to pick people who are bidding the most, and only those transactions go into the block. Well, is mining possible with GPUs? So it's very difficult to answer this question whether you can, what kind of mining machine you make. This would depend upon which crypto you are mining. So whether you're mining Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin Gold, or you're doing ETH, there's so many different cryptos you can mine. And many of them can use the same hardware also. So depending upon the software, you would need to do that. Yeah, why Ethereum transaction fee is high right now? I'll tell you the reason. Look, Ethereum was never made to be a speculative asset. ETH, okay, by the way, Ethereum is not the right word to use. Ethereum is the name of the protocol that runs on multiple blockchains. Usually when the world talks about Ethereum, they are talking about mainnet. Other than mainnet, there are multiple other test networks. Now in mainnet, ETH is the native currency. Every time that transactions happen on the Ethereum mainnet, you need to pay gas fees, which is in ETH. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are speculating on the price of ETH, which is shooting up. It in fact went up to $2,000. And unfortunately, because of that, all transactions on ETH, on the Ethereum platform, become very expensive. I hope that's clear about why Ethereum has become, transactions are high because the ETH value has shot up too much, which should never have actually happened. Ideally, ETH should have remained at $1 or even below. And the higher it goes, more and more Ethereum projects are now actually failing and shutting down. Yes, definitely you can mine BTC with these supercomputers, but you need to have access to them. And if you have access to them, definitely you will probably end up winning more blocks and naturally making a lot more money. But please understand, today there's a global competition, and in fact, you have to compete with a lot of people for your mining. Now, I recall way back somewhere in early 2011, you could just use a normal laptop to mine. Not anymore. Any other questions? Okay. Now, one concept we must all understand is this supply being limited or unlimited. The logic is, like I said, in Bitcoin, we are having maximum 21 million which are going to be generated, and already 18 plus million have already been generated. So the number is limited, and which is why its value over time is expected to constantly go up. Can you help us understand how applications work on blockchain or on Ethereum platform? Sure. So what happens is, when we talk about Ethereum, so like I said, let's just consider it now for a simple blockchain, the mainnet. Now, on top of this mainnet, people are running different projects, and each of these projects has a native token, not coin. Now, this is where you must understand the difference between a cryptocurrency coin and a cryptocurrency token. Whenever something runs natively on a blockchain, it is called a coin. So on Bitcoin blockchain, we are natively running BTC, so we call it a coin. On Ethereum, ETH is native, so it is called as coin. But projects, what they generate is not actually the native coin, it is something connected, so we call it a token. And every time that you're creating these tokens, you're basically writing a smart contract. I'm going to show you this later when we actually install our own blockchain from scratch. And that is the time when you set a separate token, and anybody who wants to use your project for whatever it is doing, they will be then buying those tokens also. But always remember, no matter what tokens you use, when the transaction is pushed to the Ethereum platform, the fee has to be paid in ETH only. I hope that's clear. So I've also actually written a lot about how the Ethereum ecosystem works, how the Bitcoin ecosystem works. So if you just follow me on social media, on LinkedIn, I've put a lot of these step-by-step details, so you can always have a look at them also. So miners can focus only on those transactions that are beneficial to them and can create fraudulent. No. Yes, they can concentrate on what they want, but that doesn't create a fraudulent chain. Please understand, every transaction which you push has to be digitally signed with your private key. So nobody else can sign a transaction for you. Only your private key can do it, which is what you are supposed to have. So in fact, Elon Musk made a recent statement that if a crypto app does not give you control of your private key, don't ever use it. And he's correct. You are supposed to have it. You are always supposed to maintain and hold your own private keys. And you'll be surprised to know that private keys can actually be written on a piece of paper. So in fact, I've written a book called as the Future Money Playbook. You can just download it for free. Later, I'll put the link here. I've actually shown photographs of how you can, on a piece of paper, also write down your private keys and address. So you can keep it as safe as you want. But remember, it should always be with you, your private key. Any other questions? So no, they cannot do a fraudulent transaction. Any other questions? Then there are some common questions that I'm always asked. What is the difference between the Bitcoin blockchain and the Bitcoin cryptocurrency? So as you would have understood, the blockchain is what we call as the blockchain. You can say in capital letters the, because it was the first in the world. And on top of that, the native currency is called BTC. So whenever you talk about the currency, it's not Bitcoin, it's BTC. Bitcoin is actually the name of the blockchain. Right now, what are some of the applications that are popular on Ethereum? Sure. So in Ethereum, we usually find two kinds of projects. One is called as fungible and one is called as non-fungible token. Fungible means all units are the same. To give you an example, let's say you have 10,000 rupees in your ICICI bank account. All those 10,000 are the same unit. There's no difference. I have 5,000, you have 10,000. It is ultimately all the same thing. It's rupees. There's no difference between 1 rupee of ICICI bank and 1 rupee of Axis bank. So that is what we call as fungible. But non-fungible is when each of them is different. So when you take, let's say, a piece of art, like a painting, and the digitized version of that is put on Ethereum, that becomes an NFT or non-fungible, which basically means each token is different because it could represent a different asset. And of course, when we talk about the applications today, the number one kinds of applications are what we call as DeFi, decentralized finance. Now, in the conventional world, finance is very centralized. Banks, stock exchanges, all these central entities manage it. But when we put them on a blockchain, nobody knows who they are dealing with. So everything is decentralized. Anybody can do anything. And those are called DeFi transactions, and that is what is most popular. In DeFi, we have derivatives which are done in a big way. We have liquidity providers. And these are today, the volumes are in trillions. You will be surprised to know. But Ethereum handles more than $1 trillion worth of transactions every quarter. And most of these are going to be the DeFi kind of transactions. I hope that answers your question. Does anyone else have a question? Okay. Then we also have the blockchain versus other blockchains. Can you kindly briefly one more use case of NFTs? So yeah, so like I said, one is things like CryptoKitties or these kind of digital art. That is the number one project that we today find in the NFT space. Digital art is what I feel is the number one thing that is going on. Other than that, there are a few other tokens, NFTs also, which are available. Like for example, some people are converting the shares of companies onto the blockchain. So this we usually call this concept as a wrapped share, WRAPPED. So a wrapped share means Bitcoin, for example, is running on a separate blockchain, but there is a custodian who holds the Bitcoin in some other place, and against it issues a token called WBTC on the Ethereum blockchain. Similarly, you can do it for shares of companies. So as an Indian, you may not be able to buy Amazon or Facebook or Apple shares because it's listed in the US, for example. So what do? You could go to these DeFi platforms and say, I want to buy Amazon shares. They will give you this kind of a token, which is backed by the Amazon share held by somebody in the US. And those are other examples of NFTs. Okay, how 51% attack? So if you look at the original Bitcoin white paper, in fact, I would strongly recommend that you must read the original Bitcoin white paper. Now, in that, they talk about that as long as a majority of the miners are honest, the system will be foolproof. But 51% means if more than half the miners suddenly become rogue, or they try to crack the system, then these fake transactions and all could start to happen. We have not yet seen an actual 51% attack succeed on BTC. But if that happens, that could be disastrous for the price, because then that would be a real break in the chain. Dust attack. So what happens is that, let's say you are having X number of BTC and now you're making a payment. Some amount comes back to you as change. When you pay money in a note and you get back some chiller or change. Similarly, dust is these small, minute amounts of microscopic coins, you could say, like 0.001, which come back. And in a dust attack, you could send it in such a way that many such transactions of dust start to take place, and that starts to slow down the network. And in fact, that is the reason we have native tokens. That the Ethereum people also realize that if we do not force people to pay a charge for every transaction, hundreds and thousands of transactions will happen all the time, just for random bringing down the system and launching a denial of service attack. And that's the reason every transaction costs you money. So if you're trying to DOS the system out, it's going to be very costly for you. Any other questions? Okay. Then we have the concept of other blockchains. So Ethereum is an example, Neo, QTUM, Cardano. There are many different public blockchains available which people can run projects on. So Ethereum is not the only one. People use others also. Then there is a concept called private, hybrid, and public blockchain. So Bitcoin is public. Ethereum is public, which means anybody in the world can become part. You don't need to take permission from anyone. Private is when one organization runs it, which according to me is not a sensible use case. It doesn't make any sense for one organization to run. It is much better that you run your own private database. However, hybrid is an interesting concept. Hybrid is where a bunch of people come together. So 20 banks can come together, circulate nodes with each other, and then carry out, let's say, global cross-border remittances. So these are the three kinds of blockchains: public, private, and hybrid. Any questions? I've also given links. You can later on check out what Neo and QTUM and all that do. Any questions as of right now? Okay. Now, why blockchain? One of the most important features of why we use blockchain is it removes the characteristic of infinite reproducibility of a digital asset. That is the number one point. that I could digitally sign a Word document, but somebody can make 20 copies of it. That cannot happen on a blockchain, and every asset can be very carefully controlled. And in fact, I'm going to show you a demo of how we actually build these assets. So that is the reason that we actually use blockchains. Any other questions? Now let me just broadly and quickly discuss some of the basic types of encryption. So one is what we call as the symmetric encryption. In symmetric encryption, the key that you use, so if you can see the key here, this is the plain text, encrypted becomes the ciphertext, which you cannot read. But the same key can be used to decrypt it and get the plain text back. This concept is what we call as the symmetric encryption. Let me give you a simple example. So let us say there is this sentence, I fear not the man. So this is a Bruce Lee quote. Now, when I use the AES algorithm, Advanced Encryption Standard, it is considered to be the strongest symmetric algorithm in the world today. When I use it, it generates three things, of course, four things. Firstly, the password, which could be this. Secondly, is something called an initialization vector, which would be something like this. Thirdly, something called an authentication tag, which could look like this. And fourthly, the encrypted version of the data. So imagine this sentence has now become this. So obviously you cannot understand this unless you have these three things: password, IV, and tag. So in blockchains, we use this a lot. Whenever we want to decrypt the data, we have to provide four things: the password, IV, tag, and the encrypted data. Questions? Is the concept of symmetric encryption absolutely clear? I'm not seeing any response. I hope I'm clearly audible. Can someone please put a yes, no, so that I know that all of you are following? Okay, great. Thank you for that. Now let me continue. Then we have this concept called asymmetric encryption, where this plain text can be converted to the ciphertext using something called a public key, but for decryption we need something called a private key. Now this is very similar to a bank locker. When you go to the locker, you have one key and the bank manager has one key. To open the locker, both the keys have to be used, but to lock it, only one key is needed. Same concept here in asymmetric. Everybody, when you generate a key pair, you get private key and public key. The public key you distribute to the whole world. The private key you keep with yourself only. And whenever you want to decrypt something which is encrypted to your public key, you use your private key. Let me give you a simple example. So I take the single word hello, and when I encrypt it, it becomes this whole blob of text. So this I am using something called the RSA algorithm. And when I use my private key, only then will I be able to convert this back to the original message hello. So when you want to send me the hello, you will get my public key, encrypt the word hello, and send me this by email or whatever. I will then use my private key, run it on this, and get back the word hello. So all of you must be knowing about the concept of SSL, the secure socket layer. Well, that also is an application of asymmetric encryption with symmetric encryption. I hope that's clear. Any questions? Okay. Now let's move on. And then we have the final concept, which is called the digital signature. Now this is very, very popular today. In fact, if you file your income tax returns online, or you are director of a company and you are ever, signing the balance sheet and all that, you are using digital signatures, although you many times may not even realize it. Many people just give that dongle of their signature away to the chartered accountant or CS. Well, in that case, he is putting the signature for you. But the concept is very simple. You take the original text, sign it with a private key, and anybody in the world can verify it with your public key. And somewhere in the middle, hash functions are used, but that's not important for you to understand right now. This is what a digital signature actually looks like. So now in blockchains, we find that RSA is not commonly used, ECDSA is used. That stands for elliptical curve digital signature algorithm. This is what an ECDSA private key looks like. This is what an ECDSA public key looks like. Again, this is an example of the sample data, and then you will generate this digital signature. Now, because this is a signature and not encryption, we are not encrypting the text. Once your software generates the signature, it will send the original text plus the digital signature forward, and whoever gets it to verify, they will simply use this signature and this text and your public key, and they will be able to verify whether it is actually signed by you or not. That is the whole concept of a digital signature. Questions? Or if you can just key in clear so that I know that it's all clear so far. I hope it's all clear. How can we see our own? Yeah, that's a very good point. So now it depends upon the blockchain. Now, many times what happens is we use, for example, an app, and based on that app, it is going to generate the keys. In that case, your keys are inside your app, but you may not be able to see them. So the simplest way to do it is you can go to bitaddress.org, and there you can just move the mouse around on its on the screen, and it will generate the private key and give it to you, and then you can download and keep it with yourself. That's the simplest way to actually do this. Difference between asymmetric and digital. Yeah. So the concept of asymmetric is to encrypt the data so that nobody can read it. Confidentiality. The concept of digital signature is to sign and verify, to introduce the concept of non-repudiation. You have signed a legal agreement, you should not be allowed to later say, no, I didn't sign it. So asymmetric encryption and digital signatures work on the same technology. Private public key pair, hash functions, but their purpose is different. So in a digital signature, you use the private key to sign so that you are authorizing a transaction. In asymmetric encryption, somebody else uses your public key to encrypt the data and you decrypt using private key. So that's the basic difference, the function or the logic behind it. Encryption for confidentiality, digital signature for non-repudiation. I hope that answers your question. Any other question? Okay, let me move ahead. Okay, so now somebody had asked a question about how do we hack into a blockchain. So now I can sort of give you one of the first level answers on that. For that, we need to understand what actually is there when we talk about a blockchain solution. There are multiple layers in it. So first step, you are going to need a server. So let's take an example of an Ubuntu server. On that Ubuntu server, I'm going to show you a demo of this very soon. And those of you who have already downloaded Multichain, you will be able to follow on your own server. But base, we are having some server. If that server is not properly hardened, then you can hack into that and the blockchain's history. See, ultimately, you must remember the blockchain is not like a Rajnikant. Rajnikant is unhackable and unbeatable. Blockchain is not like that. There are multiple levels of insecurity or vulnerability in it. And the number one point is the operating system. No, we are not going to do live hacking of it. But now Ubuntu can be hacked. If it is not properly hardened, later I'm going to discuss how you even harden Ubuntu. That becomes one level of hacking. Then once you have set up this blockchain, you have the keys and the data, which is in the picture. Now that is, you have your ECDSA keys. You could have RSA keys for encryption and the encrypted data. So that becomes the second point of vulnerability, that data could be stolen, hacked. So let's say the data is flowing between the nodes from one node to the other. Now when it is flowing ultimately through the internet. If that is not encrypted, then that's the second point of vulnerability that you get, which is also sometimes called as the packet sniffing. So if you're asking questions on hacking, you obviously know all this, but just to broadly tell you, we use a concept called ARP cache poisoning. So there is something called the address resolution protocol. So you are sitting at an airport, lots of people are using the Wi-Fi there. You set up this software which can then fool everybody into thinking that your computer or your router is the main fellow, and all the data now starts flowing through that. And that, because of ARP cache poisoning, you have fooled everyone into believing you are the original hacker or the original router, and all the data flows through you, and there you can actually copy the data, including SSL data. So that becomes a very major level of hacking, and that's the simplest way to hack into a blockchain, so to say. Then you have the blockchain framework. So now you have installed Multichain, Ethereum, whatever protocol that you are using. On top of that, usually you have an API layer, And then finally, you have your web and mobile application. That is the biggest point of vulnerability. Can make it hot. That is the biggest point of vulnerability if you are able to hack into the web application. Now that's a standard web app. So you can use the standard attacks, even an SQL injection may work, and you actually hacked into the blockchain. So please remember, whenever you use the word blockchain hacking, there are multiple things you could end up hacking. The core operating system, the data layer, the data while it is flowing from one node to another, or the end application. And of course, in terms of simplicity, I would say the end application is the simplest to actually hack. Any questions? Is it all clear? Again, I'd need to hear a yes, no, or a question. Can someone respond? Okay, great. Now let's take a look at a simple layout for a blockchain application. So what you see here within these dotted lines is the private network. What you see outside is on the internet. So now let's start from here. So you have these authorized users. Let's say they are customers of a bank, and the bank is using blockchain, and this is the bank's node. So if there are 10 different banks, each of them has his node, and to that node, they are connecting to their private network. And then this is the bank's customers here. So now there is a load balancer here. The load balancer is connected to your app subnet. You are having the caching server here. You are having the node outside. You are having the API server here. And then you are having your database subnet here. And this whole thing comes under your private network. So now you will realize by looking at this that this is like any other kind of application. So yes, blockchain applications at the end of the day are all going to function in a very similar way. But the blockchain part of it is a little different. Everything else is normal. So all the points of vulnerability that you have in a regular application, almost all those points of vulnerability you are going to have in a blockchain application also. Questions? All clear? Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, great. Now, actually go into some practical point of discussion. Now, how do we set up and secure a blockchain? So first step is that we will set up and harden at least 2 servers. So one is going to be, we could call it as our main server. For sake of simplicity, let's just say blue and green server. So a blue server is the core where we are going to actually set up the blockchain initially. So our Genesis block, you remember Genesis block? The Genesis block is the first block or block 0. So we are going to set that up on the blue one, and then we are going to set up multiple nodes on the green one, which you can connect to. Somebody's asked a question here, can we generate private key from public key? No, you cannot. The private public key generation starts from the formula. So we use prime numbers for this. I have also written a short white paper on the RSA algorithm. If you're unable to find it online, just email me on rohasnagpal@gmail.com. I'll send it to you. So you'll realize how the mathematics goes. It starts with 2 random prime numbers. And then the end result, somebody says no. I'm not really sure what you mean by that. Can you clarify whether you are understanding or not? Okay. So that mathematical formula then finally leads to the generation of the public and the private key. You cannot take one of the keys and then generate the other one. That's not how it works. It has to start with those prime numbers, and then the 2 keys are the end result of it. So after we set up these 2 servers, which are hardened Ubuntu servers, for example, then we will install a blockchain framework. So there we have multiple options. You could use multi-chain, Ethereum, so many others. You could even use Bitcoin. For today's demo, we are going to use the multi-chain. Okay. Somebody's asked a question, what is a load balancer? So what happens is if many people are trying to access your application at the same time, the system may get overwhelmed and shut down, or it may slow down. So what a load balancer does is, you may have 4 servers at the back. The first transaction that comes in is pushed to the first server, second to the second, third, fourth, fifth transaction goes back to the first. The load balancer is the guy who's going to balance this load. And if one of those servers goes down, he will pass on to the others. So that's the job of the load balancer. It is not specific to blockchain. All web applications use load balancers. Then once we have installed the multi-chain, we will create the blockchain. Then we will connect to the blockchain. Then I will show you some basic commands which we can run. And finally, I will show you the most important use case, which is asset management. So we are going to see how we create assets and how we can send them around. Questions? Because now we begin with the practical session. So if you have questions, now is a good time to ask them. Okay. So I'm presuming all of you are clear with everything so far. Now, when we set up a core server, for today's demo, you can just set up a simple one. But usually when we do it for a production run, as far as basic Ubuntu hardening is concerned, there are at least 11 steps that you need to follow. So you need to set up a user account because you don't want to run the blockchain or these applications as a root user, because if someone gets in there, everything's over. So you set up another user with limited permissions. Then obviously you need to make sure all the packets are updated. So your system is not having any outdated package, otherwise that could be very easy to hack. Then you set up password aging. Sorry. The meaning of that is after how much time people are forced to change their password. Then you set up the swap partition, you disable ping requests and IPv6, you verify that your open SSL version is the latest, you secure the shared memory, you secure TMP, where TMP, you set your security limits, and final point, you have to ensure that you're not vulnerable for bash. This was a very major vulnerability which came out a few years ago. So these are usually the 11 simple terms, but I don't want to go into this detail right now because we are talking about the blockchain, not so much the networking. Now you could use Red Hat, you could use Mac, you could use Windows, you could use any kind of a operating system that you want. Blockchains run on all of them. So let's see how we actually install. So first of all, we need basic system requirements. So for multi-chain, you need 64-bit. Ubuntu works, CentOS works, Debian works, Fedora, Red Hat. Windows also is supported, 64-bit. Mac also is supported. And you'll be very interested to learn that the RAM requirements are very low. You need just half a GB of RAM. Blockchains are not RAM intensive. The misconception comes because of Bitcoin. See, in Bitcoin, there are miners competing against each other, millions of them. And that is the reason we need so much computational power. But when we talk about say a private blockchain or a hybrid one where people are not competing, even a half GB RAM is more than enough to actually run it. Okay. And then you need 1 GB of space, of course, as the data in the blockchain increases. So for example, in blockchains, one limitation you could say is that you have to maintain all the data from day one. So the Bitcoin blockchain, I think, started in 2009. Now today is 2021. If you want to set up a full node, you are going to download all the transactions which have happened from 2009 till today. And that's like more than 100 GB. And as in future also, all transactions will be broadcast to all these nodes. So that is when you will need more and more data hard disk space. For right now, 1 GB is enough. Okay. So now what I want you to do is, those of you who are doing it along with me, please log into your server, which you have already set up, or you could even do it on your laptops, and you need to run these 5 lines. So you need to run cd/temp, you need to do a wget with exactly this. So if you have downloaded this PPT or PDF, you can actually copy paste the commands from here. This one, change directory, and then finally move it into this place. Now for sake of convenience, the next few slides, I'm going to talk about something called the blue server and the green server. I would request if you can also note down this IP address, because this IP address 159.65.149.21 is the IP address of my main node on which my blockchain is running. So when you set up your own, you are going to connect to that particular block or that particular node. So you can note down the IP address. So I'll give you a couple of minutes if you are actually running the commands. In the meanwhile, if anybody else has a question, please ask me. We'll wait for a couple of minutes. Any other questions so far? Okay. So great. I'm presuming you are all setting it up. Whoever has the node running, you can use your Mac laptop also normally, which can connect to it. So what we are setting up is you could sort of consider it like a private blockchain because you are not going to get mining rights. The mining rights are reserved in this blue server that I have set up. Okay, somebody says they're a tech newbie, will just watch. Absolutely no problem. You can just, let's just give it another few seconds. Okay. Now, this is what the command would look like. So I hope all of you are able to see this clearly. So here I've logged in from my Mac laptop. I did an SSH root at my IP address. So you would do the same thing. You would run it on your own server. So what would change is this IP address that you see, you would use your own IP address because you can only log into your own node. Then I entered the password. This is the Ubuntu system that I've logged into. And this is the standard Ubuntu disclaimer that comes. And now it shows that I'm logged into this server. Now the name of my server is test chain. So it says root at test chain. Now I'm logged in. I hope that part's simple. Okay, some questions have come. Let me just see. Can you tell us about Prime Chain? How is it different from Polkadot? Yeah, that's an interesting question. So Prime Chain is actually an API layer. What we do in that is it's a downloadable software. When you download that and you run it on a server, it sets up the blockchain, does all the security and hardening, then sets up an API layer, then sets up a UI layer on top of it. The user interface layer with the mobile app, the progressive web app. It also has social login enabled like Google login, Facebook login, and that whole thing is set up, but in a private kind of a scenario. That means you will use Prime Chain to set up your own blockchain. Whereas something like a Polkadot is a global public blockchain which you can directly connect to and start using. Prime Chain is not a public blockchain. It is a software to set up private or hybrid blockchain. I hope you get that answer. Then what do you think of blockchains such as EOS where you own resources and spend them to run dApps rather than consistently buy? Obviously, it is much better. In fact, the biggest problem with Ethereum is the rising cost of ETH. And that already some startups have shut down development on Ethereum because they say that the transaction costs have become too much. I mean, it is almost gone up to $20 per transaction. I mean, it is impossible to sustain anything where you're spending $20 a transaction. So yes, anything which doesn't have that transaction cost is the only way forward. Is this way of running dApps better for the future of the blockchain? Can you? Yeah, so it is naturally much better to run in scenarios where the transaction costs are as close to zero as possible. But please also understand why have transaction costs been put? Transaction costs have been put so that people don't spam the network or DOS the network out. So transaction fee also serves a useful purpose. So if you take away the transaction fee in a public scenario, then every day you will have DOS attacks which will bring it down. So transaction fee has a reason, but it also causes a problem when the cost becomes too high. So yeah, it's a sort of quite a strange problem that Ethereum is facing. Now that we are logged in, we go to the next step, these commands that I showed you. So we ran all of them one by one. And finally, that part is completed. All of you may have also done that. Now I'm showing it to you on the green server because basically I've set up two servers. So one is the main one where I am running the blockchain and the Genesis block was generated. Then I set up another one which is connecting to it. So now in the next few slides, whenever you see blue, remember blue is the main one and green is another node just like the node you are running on your server or laptop. So blue is the big guy, green is the small guy, and you are also connecting like a small guy because you don't have the mining permission. What platform Prime Chain is made of? It is made on multi-chain, not on Hyperledger. Hyperledger is actually not a true blockchain. I believe it is a distributed ledger, and multi-chain, it runs on Bitcoin, actually on the Bitcoin core which has been modified, and I consider that to be the true blockchain and not a distributed ledger. But again, you feel free to disagree with me. See, I'm more old-fashioned when it comes to blockchain. So I believe that the word blockchain should only be used when you are running proof of work. Everything else I would call as distributed ledger. So even when Ethereum moves on to proof of stake, we would call it then a distributed ledger. And I'll tell you the reason. It is not my invention that I'm giving this reason. The Bitcoin blockchain white paper, for the first time in the world, used the word blockchain. In fact, it didn't say blockchain, it said chain of blocks. But it spoke about proof of work. So if we are now changing proof of work, we can no longer call it blockchain. We should call it distributed ledger. I mean, it's just semantics. Okay. Now let's go ahead and actually create the blockchain, right? So what I have done is I have created it by running. So multi-chain is very simple to set up. Once all the software is downloaded, all that you need to do is run multi-chain -util create test chain. Now test chain is the name of my blockchain. You can call it whatever you want, but when I set it up, I called it test chain. After that, I run one command, multi-chain D. It's not a spelling mistake, it is with this D at the end. The name of my blockchain, space hyphen daemon. When I run this command, so let's show it to you here. So when I run this command here, you see multi-chain -util create test chain. So this is created, and then as you can see, it shows that okay, fine, multi-chain is being set up here. Then can you read starting up node? So again, on your own downloaded version of the PDF, you can read it. So it says that the node is starting. It says looking for the Genesis block. Then it says Genesis block found. Please remember, Genesis block is block 0, the first thing. Everything begins from that. So like the universe started with the Big Bang, so the same way the blockchain started here with the Genesis block. Now it tells you that other nodes can connect to this node using this particular command. So now all of you, if you are running it on your laptop, you will need to run this command, multi-chain D testchain at 159.65.149.21:8363. 8363 is the default port number. Of course, you can always change port numbers. I have not changed any of the default parameters. And then it is going to listen to API requests on 8362. So you are connecting on 8363. 8362 is where API requests will be running. That uses something called the RPC allow, which is the remote procedure calls, but we don't need to go into that much depth. And then finally it says node is ready. And it's up for me to now run more commands. So again, I'll give you a minute or two. If you are setting this up live, please only run this line. Multi-chain D test chain at this IP address : the port number. Somebody said, what is blacklist coin? No, I have not heard about this. So if somebody from the admin team is here, can you please Google blacklist coin and just write an answer? I have not heard of this particular coin before. Again, I'll give you a minute to run that particular command. Yeah, you can even copy it from here. So what I call as the second server, you are part of the second server. So you can simply copy paste this command, multi-chain D -test chain at IP address : port. Okay. So now what happens is, after you have done this, I will now have to grant you permissions. Now this is a very important concept. I want you to focus here. This is a blockchain address. So irrespective of which blockchain platform or framework we are using, you're always going to have addresses. So Bitcoin addresses are there, they may look different. The number of characters may be different, but ultimately they all will be looking like this alphanumeric number. So everybody who creates a node, right, that person gets an address for that node. And that is that node. Can we run this command? Yeah, you can use terminal. Now, everybody who connects a node, when you set up multi-chain on your node, it will give the node address. You have to actually send it to me by email or whatever form you want. And after I receive it, I will then log into my system and I will grant you the permission. So I will go with this command, multi-chain -CLI. So in fact, what I can recommend is better don't do it live right now. Follow the here, and I will keep this server on for some time. So after this session is over, say maybe till Sunday, I can keep it running. So during those next couple of days, if you want to connect, after you have gotten your address, just email it to me at rohasnagpal@gmail.com. So if I can request the admin team, can you just put my email address on the chat so everybody can get it? Yeah. So you can later follow the commands here, and then once your address is generated, just email it to me. I will then give you permission and you can actually use it. After I grant you this permission, then on your server you will run this multi-chain D space test chain space hyphen daemon. After that, you can run this multi-chain hyphen CLI test chain so that it becomes easier for you to run commands. After you have done that, this is why it looks like this. So when you set up the multi-chain on your server, it will show you this address here. Do you see this 1C? It will show it to you and you can just simply copy paste from there and email it to me. So you don't have to do any guesswork. It will just straight away pop it up. So far, have all of you understood? I need a simple yes, no. Is it all clear? I need a, yeah, great. So once you have run this in, so whenever you see green, that's what you are going to see on your system. Now, once you send it to me by email, what I'm going to do is, notice here, I'm going to say multi-chain hyphen CLI, test chain, which is the name of my blockchain. Then I'm going to say grant. Then I'm going to paste your address, which continues still here. And I'm going to say connect. What does it mean? It means that I have given your node the permission to connect to the blockchain. So in multi-chain, there are 6 different kinds of permissions that you can have. Connect is the most basic one, which allows you to connect your node to the blockchain. Then there is send, receive, admin, mine, different kinds of permissions that come in. But most important is the connect permission. So when your node connects to the main blockchain, it needs connect permission. And that is the permission that I will grant it. After that, on your node, you can create hundreds of addresses. And I can then grant each of those addresses different permissions. Some I can give the send permission, receive permission. All that is customizable. So blockchains are highly customizable when it comes to permission. And that's also very important to remember, because if you end up giving the wrong permission, again, you're opening it up to an attack. So if some unauthorized guy ends up getting admin permissions or mine permissions, your blockchain is ruined. So we have to be very careful what permission we give anybody. Questions? Is it all absolutely clear so far? This part that I've granted permission. Now you will notice this long alphanumeric number here. Now, what is that hexadecimal code that you are looking at? That is the transaction ID. Every single blockchain transaction has to generate an ID. If the transaction ID is not generated, the transaction has not gone through. Which is why you cannot hide a blockchain transaction. Everything, when it goes through, generates a transaction ID. And that is the only thing which proves that that particular transaction has actually happened on the blockchain. So everything that we do will generate these transactions. You don't have to save them. It's just proof that the transaction has gone through. Sometimes it may take time for it to happen. So like when you're creating an asset, it may take a few seconds to show up, but till it shows up, transaction has not gone through. Does blockchain have stuff like a normal computer does, like ring? No, see, okay. So it's very difficult to compare it to a regular computer because you are running this on top of the computer. So you are running the server like a normal Linux server. On top of that, you are running the blockchain as a software. Then the blockchain, when it starts to run, becomes like an instance of it running. Then it only supports limited commands. So whatever I can run here are multi-chain commands. Nothing else will be allowed to run. Okay. Let's proceed. So here again, now I've shown it to you that on the green computer, you will again see once the permissions are there, you will see node ready. Then on both, I run this multi-chain hyphen CLI space test chain. The reason I run that command is that after this, now we are entering into something called the interactive mode. So every time I don't need to keep entering the multi-chain name, I can now straight away run my commands. So in your system, you should just see test chain, colon, and dot here. Now let's run some very basic commands. So the first command is get info. What does it do? It shows you all the available commands. Help obviously gives you all the permissions, list permissions. So this will show you all the addresses and what permissions they are having. We can see list addresses, get peer info. Now this is a very interesting concept, peer info. Who are the peers connected to me? That's the answer that you are going to get. I apologize if I sound, no, you don't sound stupid at all. Please feel free to ask any question. A lot of the people in the call today may be having very basic knowledge, so please don't forget, don't feel shy asking questions. Then get blockchain params and get runtime params. So first I'll explain what is the meaning of get peer info. Every node connected to the blockchain is called a peer. So when I run it from my node, it will show me all the other nodes details. When you run it from your node, it will show you all the others except for you. So all the other peers connected to you. Now multi-chain comes in two versions. One is the community edition, which we are using right now. There, the data between nodes is not encrypted. But if you use the paid edition, in that case, the enterprise edition, all the data flowing between nodes will be encrypted. Getting blockchain parameters means it will show you a list of the parameters of the blockchain. And runtime params. Now, you'll be surprised to know that even once your blockchain goes live, some parameters can be changed. And that is where the difference comes between blockchain parameters and runtime parameters. Blockchain parameters are usually the ones which cannot be changed in future. Runtime parameters are the ones which can be changed in future. And that is what enables us to keep updating our blockchain in future. After all, technology is not going to remain static. So how do we keep upgrading our blockchain? That is where runtime params come into the picture. Any questions? Okay. Now then we are also going to see the grant. Grant gives permissions to people. So in multi-chain, we can give connect so that you can connect your node. Send, which means you can send assets. Receive, which means you can receive assets. Then you can create data streams. So a data stream sort of is like a database within the blockchain. So, suppose you want to store data. Let's say you want to store KYC data in encrypted form. You will then create a data stream, and then you will be able to put data into it. So the permission to create a data stream can be given separately to an address. You can get the permission to issue assets. You can mine, that becomes a very important part of the blockchain. You can activate different functions, and you can become an admin. So these are the 8 different permissions. And then of course you can list all the permissions given specifically to an address. So let me start with the first one. So first, if I run get info, you have to simply type in the word get info and hit enter. It will show you all the detailed information about this blockchain. Now, some of the points I want you to focus on. Version, this is 2.1.2 multi-chain. Node version we can ignore. Edition is community edition, not the paid edition. Protocol version is given here. The name is test chain. We had given that name. Protocol is multi-chain. If you are running Ethereum, protocol could show Ethereum. In multi-chain, you can even run the Bitcoin protocol. Port number shows up to you here. Now, a very important thing is called the burn address. And it's a very weird looking address. Have any of you ever heard of the word burn address? Let me explain what it does. It's a very interesting concept. See, in a blockchain, we cannot delete. We can only add data. So suppose we want to delete some assets. No, we have created 10,000 shares. But now we want to make it 9,000. We realize 1,000 was by mistake. Or we want to now destroy the shares. There is only one way to do it. And that is by sending that many shares or units or assets to the burn address. So by default, every blockchain will have one burn address. The meaning is this is an address which has no known private key. That means nobody in the world can access data or assets sent to that address. Nobody, even the creator of the blockchain cannot. That is the reason it is given the name burn address, shown to you here. Yes, it is in a JSON format. In fact, JSON is supported by multi-chain. The output also is given to you in a JSON format, which is why it is very easy to integrate multi-chain into any JSON supporting application. And that's the reason I'm a big fan of multi-chain and not any of the others. So whenever you want to destroy an asset, send the units which you want to destroy to the burn address and it's gone. Nobody now can ever access it. I hope that part is clear. Any questions? Okay, great. Then other than burn address, there are lots and lots of other things, blocks we can ignore. You remember we spoke about the difficulty level constantly being adjusted so that the block time of 10 minutes is maintained in Bitcoin. Well, difficulty level is shown here. Pools we can ignore for the time being. Yeah. So I've broadly told you, no problem if you ever want to see what the other terms means. So then in that case, you can go to the multi-chain side and every single API is documented in detail. So you can see the meaning of each of those terms. Now let me run another command which is called list permissions. So without space, just enter list permissions and then it will show you the different addresses. So there is an address which begins with 1 capital C and 1 capital N. Now this fellow, 1 capital C, is the address of that green node. So he has only the connect permission. And my address on the blue node is 1N. It has mining permission, admin permission, activate permission, and few other permissions which if you scroll down, you will be able to see all of them. So this shows us all the addresses and what are the permissions that they have. Yeah, it's continuing. So it also has the is mine set as true. Then if you do it on the green, then it shows you only your address, which is this starting with the 1C. In your case, it will not be 1C, it will be something else. And is mine means it's of that particular node. Then another command that you can run is called the get peer info. So like I explained to you that it will show you all the other nodes that you are connected to. And then for each of the nodes, it will show you their address, their port number, their IP address is of course shown to you here. This is the main of mine. Then all these, okay, we can ignore for the time being. None of them are so critical for you to understand. One thing to remember, because we're using community edition, encryption is false. So data traveling between nodes can be sniffed by somebody. So later when you log in on your node, you can do get peer info and see details of your node. So that would be something like this. Same again, you can see all the data. Okay. Then we have another one which is called get blockchain params or the blockchain parameters. So here again, chain is multi-chain. By default, a stream called root is automatically created. After that, you can create multiple more streams. Maximum block size you can ignore. Okay. Ports are given to you here. Okay. Then this is a very, very important part. All the common 8 permissions which are there, what is the status? If for any of these I had kept it as true, automatically anybody then would be able to spin up a node and connect. So if we were to look at a Bitcoin scenario, all these permissions, of course Bitcoin doesn't have all of these permissions, they have their own, but in Bitcoin or in any public blockchain, each of these permissions would be set as true. But because I'm going with a private or a scenario, I will keep each of them as false and then I will one by one give permissions. So this is a very crucial part, and again a mistake here can destroy your blockchain, is that you have to understand the business requirements, and based on that all these parameters are set up at the initial blockchain creation time. So again, you can set up this complete detailed file, tweak each of those parameters. I think there are about 60 to 100 different parameters. So yes, the first time it will take you a very long time to do it, but once you get the hang of it, you can use the same template. And that has to be set up right in the beginning. Okay. Yeah. So you remember we spoke about in Bitcoin every 10 minutes, the reward, every 4 years, the reward is reducing in half. So it started with 50 Bitcoins per block and it's gone down to 6.25 and slowly it will become 0. That is set up here. Right on top, do you see record halving interval? So in seconds, you can set up that interval also. That after how much time the reward should become half. Other than that, there are a whole bunch of things, but since many of you are new to this, I don't want to go into details of all of them. But yes, there's a whole bunch of parameters that you can see. If later you have any problem understanding a parameter, please feel free to email me. Okay. Then I can run something called list permissions. It shows me all the addresses and their permissions. I can list the miners. That means which are the addresses which have mining permission. So only one, that is this one capital N, only that fellow or that address has mining rights. Then we go on to the asset management. So first we will create an asset. Before I go into that, any questions? Is it all clear? I'm going into the final stage, which is the asset part of it. So if there are any questions, let me have them now. Otherwise, okay, all fine, great. Now, when we create an asset, before we do that, we need to first run these two commands to identify which address we should use to create that asset. So we will run list permissions issue and list addresses. And the logic is that any address is suitable if it appears in the output of the first command and the second command together with this is mine equal to true. So only addresses which satisfy that condition should be used to create. So we ran this first command and we ran the second command. You can see in this one, 1n is the address. Again in this one, 1n is the address. Is mine is true, which means it's on my node. Now I can create an asset using this address. Please remember, you can set up unlimited addresses on each and every node. Now, this may look a little complicated, but it's not. Let me explain it to you. The command is called issue from. Then we put the first address, that issue from whom? So this address. Next is issue to whom? And that is the second address. They can be the same or they can be different. There is no rule on that. In this example, I am issuing from this address to itself. So an address with the permission can issue assets to itself or to any other address which has received permission. Then you will notice a JSON kind of a thing where a curly bracket opens. Then in double quotes, we put any parameter that we want. It is not fixed. You can call it whatever you feel like. So you can call it name, you can call it company name, you can call it asset name, whatever. So in double quotes, we give the name of the parameter. Then next to it, after this colon, you have to follow this exact. Now in this double quotes, you can write whatever you want. So I have said Alpha LLC, which is a company. Their series A is the name of this asset. Then comes open, whether it is true or false. What is the meaning of that? If you set an asset as open, you can create more units in future. So you create 10,000 units now, you can create 5,000 more, 30,000 more, any amount. But if you create it as false, you can never create any more units of that asset. So be very careful when you create an asset. In this example, because it is equity shares of a series, I will say false, because in future the company will do series B, series C, startups when they raise funding. So I have kept it as false. Then it says how many units. So I say 50,000. Then it says how many digits in decimal do you want to support. Now you may know that in Bitcoin it goes to 1 billion. It is called a Satoshi, 0.00001. So you can decide how many decimal points you want to support. Now because I'm doing for equity shares, you cannot break an equity share into parts. So I'm saying no decimals. It has to be a whole number. But you can choose to put how many ever decimal digits you want. Then I can say company and I can give the name of the company and their address. I can say type series A equity shares. I can say issue date and I can put today's date. Please remember, you can do whatever you want here. Within these curly brackets, you can create unlimited parameters, give it whatever name you want and feed whatever data you want into it. And when you run that here, it will run it and it will generate the transaction ID. Again, you may remember, on a blockchain, whenever a transaction goes through, a transaction ID has to be generated. If it is not generated, then something has gone wrong. So when you are preparing your code, always call back the transaction ID. Because if it is not coming back to your application should immediately realize the transaction has not gone through. And it should then try to do it again. So transaction IDs are critical in blockchain. Now, when I run list assets, I can see this asset. So as you can notice here, the name is Alpha LLC Series A. It was issued in the transaction ID this. So from an auditing point of view, transaction IDs become critical. Then you can refer to this asset in two ways. One is by calling it Alpha LLC Service A, but because it has spaces in the middle, it will give you errors in your application. So in that scenario, use an asset ref. That is a number generated by the blockchain automatically. We don't do it, and it has got numbers with hyphens in the middle. So when you are plugging this into your application, please do not use the name field, use the asset ref field, because in the name field your customer may enter all sorts of weird things, but asset ref you can refer to because it will always be clearly readable. So for this particular thing, this is the asset number. Then we can see the open is false, which means you cannot issue any more units of this. Then we can see that no restrictions have been set. Now you all must be hearing about the word smart contracts. Well, these in Ethereum, you would call the parameters differently, but it is exactly the same thing. A smart contract for an asset basically sets all these things: the name, the kinds of permissions it has. In multi-chain, which is just like Bitcoin, the parameters are run in a different way. In Ethereum, it is run in a different way, but they stand for the same thing. What you call as a smart contract there is exactly this. Then we can see that, okay, this is all false. Then we can see the details. These are the three parameters we set up, and this is the issue quantity, and we have not subscribed to any data stream. Okay, I have just about 2 minutes to go, so I will quickly try to wrap up. So this is how we created an asset. Then I have created a second asset, in which case I have kept it as open. So here again, when I run it, I get my transaction ID, and here I can see that that particular asset is called Bitcoin wrapped token. And again, the same kind of information is here. The only difference is this is an open one. And before I conclude, I would like to say that in blockchain, we can also directly push data. I don't know if you have heard, but you know, in the Bitcoin blockchain, people have even put love letters into it. Well, how do you do that? You do it like this. So you are using issue more from one address to another address, but a quantity of 0. So you're not actually issuing any currency, but you are embedding a message. So it is possible for someone to simply put a message into the blockchain. And that is one more reason why you should have a transaction fee. Because if you don't have a transaction fee, people can just start bombarding your blockchain with millions of data messages. So we can send data as well with multi-chain? Yes, absolutely. You can send data as well. That's how it looks. And then again, a transaction ID gets generated. And then when you run a command for that particular asset, you will see that one of the transactions for that asset will be the message that you have entered. Now we've run out of time, but later you can click here. So I have created this blockchain security controls. It's about a 60-70 page document, completely detailing how you can secure the blockchain. Hence the name Blockchain Security Control. So please click on that link and download the document and go through it. Now, since my time is up, I won't be able to take any more questions. So I'll request, if you have questions, email them to me. I'm going to keep this IP address running till Sunday night. So if you want to try it out, please set up your node and then send me an email. I will immediately connect you to the blockchain, and then you can try running your commands. So great. It was great being connected to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. I think the admin will have to log me out. Yeah, hi.
Hi, sir. Can you hear me?
I can exit now. I mean, it's all done, right?
Yep. That was a very informative session from you, and I think a lot many people got their doubts solved from you, and might be practicing in the next upcoming days, and might be sending you emails as well.
Sure, I'll look
So thank you once again for joining us and being a speaker for our conference. And yep, that's it for the
Okay.
session. Thank you once again. Bye bye,
Okay.
sir.
Bye. Bye.